Hey everyone, so today I am doing a video on how I made this dress. This is Shiloh by Violet Field Threads. I have made this before and I actually ended up making two this time around. So in the video you'll see two bodices, sometimes maybe four straps because I'm making two at the same time. I just don't want anybody getting confused as to why I have so many pieces, but it's a great way of showing the steps and how it looks before and after. I did not do a tutorial on the full skirt. I feel that's kind of standard. I am going to show you how I modify my skirt. Now, first of all, this is my original pattern. I line it up to the edge of my fabric and I measure out how wide I can make the radius of my waistline. So this will guarantee that when I cut this new pattern out that I can modify the waist so it has gathers, whereas if I was just to cut it the way that the pattern is, it's just a straight circle skirt all around, no gathers at all. It just fits perfectly, and I want gathers without having to cut four pieces or two full circles instead, so I don't use as much fabric, and I can get away with it because this is a smaller size. So once I did that, I went ahead and I measured the length of my original pattern skirt. It was about 15 inches, and I measure from my new waistline, I measure exactly 15 inches from there, and I go all the way around, creating a new half circle pattern. Now, I've done this quite a few times. There are apps online that you can use to calculate the radius and how much gather you want. I just decided to do it with as much gathers as possible this time around. So you can see I mark it with a pen, and if I was to place my pattern on top, I always like to double check 15, 15. If I place my original pattern in the middle, you know it fits perfectly, so I know that I made my calculations right. So I go ahead and I cut out my new half circle pattern, and I'm going to end up cutting two of these. After I do the first one, I can go ahead and just cut the second one, and that way I'm only making two half circles. Instead, if I was using the pattern, the original pattern, I would have to make four half circles. So it works pretty well. So you can tell I gain a few inches, and if you spread it out, you can tell that I have quite a bit of space, about 10 inches added to this. So the next step is making the bodice, and you're going to have a front bodice piece and a bodice cap. And the bodice cap, you just want to make sure that your direction of your fabric is in the right way in case you have a pattern like mine. You're going to stitch it together using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then you can go ahead and clip the ends with little clipper scissors. And like I said, I'm making two dresses, so I have two front bodice pieces assembled. You're only going to need one, and you will not be having a lining piece with it. So from the top, you mark in 1/2 inch, and you're going to fold that over the way that I have shown. And I just show it twice because, like I said, making two dresses, and I just recorded myself doing it for both. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and turn it right side facing up, and you can mark 1 inch from that fold line above, and that is going to be your next fold line. And it's going to be in the same direction as the top one. Just fold it down. And that is perfect. So that is basically your front bodice piece. And like I said, there is going to be no lining, so it's that easy. And you will see now what it should look like in the front and what it should look like in the back. So next, the straps. This is the back of the straps. You can tell because they're the longest, and the short straps are in the front. And you place them the way that I have just shown, with the front strap at the bottom and the top and the back strap on the top, and facing in directions that I have. The front one's facing up and the back strap's facing down. So this is the liner fabric, and just so you know, they made this pattern so it's pretty much foolproof, and I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to lay it on top the right way, and then I'm just going to turn it around just to show you that if you try to lay it in the opposite direction, it would be wrong, and you'd know automatically. So it's pretty foolproof in how you need to lay them down. Just remember that the front ones are on the bottom and the top ones are on the top. And since it's lining piece, it's any side facing up. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and iron down your seam allowance, make it flat. They will end up being pretty narrow when you're done stitching them, so you do want to make sure that this is as flat as possible to add less bulk. And you can lay them down, and this is what they should look like. And the next step, once you're done ironing down that seam allowance open, you're going to go ahead and line them up with your bodice, and you're going to make a marking right at where your straps meet the top of the bodice. So I have this little marker pen which disappears, and you can see that I'm just marking right at the top right there. And you're going to need that marking on both the lining and the main fabric. So here's my main fabric, making the same marking on both sides. So next you're ready to start sewing the straps. So here are the straps with their markings, and you're going to put them right sides facing together, and you're going to clip all around what would be the exterior side of the strap, and that area where we made that marking, see that right there? That's where that marking is to tell you not to stitch there, not to sew that opening right there, because that's where our bodice is going to go in. So line them up and clip all the way around. Now I was kind of unsure on if I needed to close the top of the straps. You can do it either way. You can stitch the top of the strap closed, or you can leave it open and fold it over later and do that. But this main goal right now is just to show you that where we put that marking for the bodice, we're going to leave that open. On a quick side note, this is how I make sure that I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I put one of my kids' Legos as a stopper for my fabric so that I'm not shifting it around too much, and it kind of always guarantees that I have an exact 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've tried other methods. This one worked best for me, so I just thought I would share. So back to the straps. Here is the straps. Like I said, I'm making 2 dresses, so I had the straps for the other dress just to show you guys what it looked like clip, and then after stitching all the way around, I'm going to show you how I left that opening so that now I can insert my bodice piece into there. So this is just because I had the 2 dresses that I'm able to show you before and after kind of situation. So you're ready to add the bodice. You're going to open up those openings, and then you're going to attach them like so to the bodice, but you're going to leave a 1/2 inch. You're going to line it up exactly 1/2 inch from that corner right there. See how I leave a little triangle at the bottom? That's exactly a 1/2 inch triangle right there. And I go ahead and I clip it all the way to the top, and I do the same with the other side, leaving, like I said, a 1/2 inch at the corner. 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, perfect. And you can go ahead and stitch that now. And once you have stitched it, you can go ahead and use your shearing scissors to go all the way around and just cut as close as you can, because remember, you're going to be turning the straps right side out, and you do not want them to be bulky at all. So you can go ahead and do that. And I do recommend that you don't cut into that area right where you're supposed to attach to the bodice, just because you need some fabric to play with when you're attaching it. So I just kind of stop right at the top right there. And after you stitch that area closed, you can go back and go ahead and trim it, which I actually do recommend, just because it makes it a little less bulky at the front. So I left it open in this case, the top, which I found out actually that the best way to do it was to actually close it up. But at this time, I just decided I would just leave it open. I thought it would make it easier, but either way works. And I just use a giant pin and I pull it out. And now you can see how it looks. You fold in your 1/2 inch seam allowance in that opening right there, which should line up right perfectly. And see, and it's going to cover your stitch line right there. So that is perfect. And you're going to do the same thing to the other side. You're going to insert, I use this little tool stick and the pin just to turn it right side out, but like I said, it works. Even if you had stitched it close, you could just use a pin or a stick to push it through and it would still work perfectly. And I actually prefer the finished corners by closing it out. So you can go ahead, turn it around, fold over in that 1/2 inch seam allowance, press it with your iron, and then you will be closing that in just 1 second. I just wanted to show you the ends of my straps. So these are the straps. The right hand side are the ones that I closed the strap prior to turning right side out, and the left side is where I left the opening and turned it right side out and then closed it, folded it in and closed it off. So back to the bodice, that is before, and this is after what it should look like. And I have this material, it's like a glue material. I don't know what it's called, but it is, I want to say Wonder Under, but it might not be. But it's like a glue and it will hold your pieces of fabric together. And you can go ahead and then turn it right side out and top stitch all the way around the straps, which is the necessary step, but when you do that, you don't want your lining piece to shift because you want it to look as professional as you can. So I really recommend using this material to glue the fabrics together to hold it in place. And then you're going to iron all the way around all of the straps, making sure they're perfect, like I said, because you are going to top stitch all the way around. And you don't want to have any creases, and you want them to be perfect. So that is the next step. It took me a while, but I ironed those straps as best I could. And now back to the centerpiece and the elastic back piece. The centerpiece is shorter, the elastic piece is longer. You are going to mark the center point for both the elastic and the front piece. And like I said, my fabric has character, so you want to make sure that you're doing it in the right direction because you don't want to have a character upside down or something just not looking right after all this work. So this is my bodice and this is my center point. I am going to line them up and I'm going to sandwich it just as so. I know it's confusing. That's the centerpiece. I just made sure my character is in the right way because I want that little zebra just like that. And now I am going to put it wrong side out. And I'm going to take my bodice and I'm going to sandwich it in, and I am mainly focused on lining it up at the center point, not at the side seams, because they will not match up. So the center point is the key thing. So once I have lined them up, I can go ahead and pin them all the way around, well, all the way to the end at least, and you're going to baste it into place. Not 1/2 inch seam allowance, just baste at the edge, so when you're adding your lining piece, it won't shift on you. So last little pin, and this is what it should look like now. And like I said, you're going to baste it in place, and then you're going to get your liner piece. And this is where it got tricky for me, so I really want you guys to make sure that you guys are getting it right. Do you see what it looks like? Just basted it right across at the edge. That's what it should look like. And then you're going to take your lining piece right side out with the front piece facing up, and you are going to sandwich it right inside of that. Just going to place it like that. And then you're going to go ahead and get your pins. You're going to open it up and you can match up the side seams, and you're going to clip it all the way around, and this is where you are going to stitch your 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you want to go all the way around. I feel like this is the part that got me so confused and delayed me for such a long time because I did not understand how it, based on the pictures and the instructions, how it was supposed to go. But once you get it, I must have read that paragraph so many times. Once you get this is what it's supposed to look like, you're like, oh, okay, well that was it. And also, can you guys see that I'm having like a little bit of excess fabric? This is why it's so important that you cut the pieces perfectly. I had a smidge too much fabric when I cut my lining piece, and you can tell that there's a little, it's a smidge too wide, but I was too lazy to go ahead and fix it. So I just kind of worked the best that I could and try to straighten it out. And I think I had a little clip, like a tiny little pinch. But at this point, I was so tired that I was okay with it. And I just moved on. And then I clipped it all the way around. And I know this is snail paste, but I just don't want you guys to get confused because this is the part that confused me the most in this pattern. So once I have clipped it all the way around, you can go ahead and stitch, like I said, 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. See, that's how it's going to come out. And then eventually, when my lining piece is all stitched in place, you'll see how it lays out. It works out, believe me, it does work out. But that's what it should look like. So you see my seam allowances, how they're facing? Just make sure you have the same thing when you're doing yours. That's what it should fold like. So just double check you did it just the same way. Okay, so I did it. I folded it. And now if I was to open it up, this is what it would look like. And the lining would fold over when I am attaching my skirt. So you can go ahead and take your shearing scissors and go ahead and trim. I really do recommend that you do this for this dress because when you top stitch the waist, if you leave that seam allowance intact, you are going to have sort of a bubble waistline and it's not going to work out. So trimming the seam allowance is really important to prevent it on the straps and in this centerpiece right here. Just so you know, and also when adding the elastic, just makes life a little bit easier. So I really do recommend trimming that seam allowance and just iron it down, make it perfect. And now you are ready to attach your skirt to your bodice, which is the next step. So the next step is adding the bodice to the skirt, and the bodice will be right side facing out. It is really important that you open the center of the skirt so that your lining is sticking down and your main fabric is sticking up, because you're only adding your skirt to your main fabric, not to your lining fabric. So you need to make sure that they are open and that when you're attaching them, you're only clipping your skirt onto the main fabric of the center of the bodice. And of course, the skirt is inside out. So you're going to go ahead and clip it all the way around. You should be marking the center points for this, but I've done this so many times that I can kind of eyeball it now. So you go ahead and you clip into place. And like I said, you can really tell that I'm only clipping my skirt to my main fabric of my bodice. And once it's all done and clipped into place, this is what it should look like from the top. And stitch around 1/2 inch seam allowance, and the next step is going to be to do the lining piece. You're going to mark exactly 1/2 inch from the top, and that is going to be your guideline as to where to iron it to fold it over, because all of that is going to come down and cover all of the stitches that you just made. So go ahead and iron it all the way through. This is a good time to also remember to trim your seam allowance of your skirt. Mine had so many ruffles that it's so bulky, and I decided not to trim my seam allowance, and it just came really kind of puffy at the center. Lesson learned, do trim your seam allowance. So see how it folds over? You can use that glue thing to keep it in place and then top stitch all the way around, leaving an opening in the back for the elastic, which I did. I did leave an opening, but now you're going to add your elastic, and you can go ahead and clean it up if you want to. I decided just to get rid of all of my gathering stitches and just try to get it all as neat as possible because I'm almost finished with this project. So elastic, non-roll elastic, please get that elastic because I had knit elastic and that was a nightmare. So no roll elastic, really important for this project. The directions I believe call for 1 inch elastic. I use 3/4 of an inch because it works out better for me. So just so you know, I go ahead and I pull it through just using a little safety pin, and I make sure that I leave a tail at the end because I don't want to pull it all the way through yet. So once you've pulled it through, I'm going to show you guys right here. It is going to line up perfectly with your seam allowance, and you can go ahead and turn it right side out. And after you've pinned the bottom, it's really important that you pin that bottom so it stays in place. And you just stitch right along that stitch line right there that you have on the side, that side seam. And it hides the stitch pretty well if you use the right color of thread. So you do the same to the other side. I didn't show it, I was so tired, but you enclose your elastic and you're done. The dress is done. I absolutely loved this dress. I thought it was adorable. Would I make any changes to this whole tutorial? I would say I would definitely cut every seam allowance on the straps and especially in the centerpiece band. I feel like you can see the bubbliness in the center band because I did not trim my seam allowance, and I had so many gathers that it adds a little bit of a puff, and I really like it when it lays flat and perfect. So that is like the first thing I would have done differently, is definitely trim all of my seam allowance. I did love the gathers. It's very twirly and it's a cute dress, and we're going to wear it to Peppa Pig World. So I hope it helps.